All right. If you'd introduce yourself, tell us your name, where you were in the Peace Corps, and the years.
So my name is Evan Taylor. I was in Western Russia from 2000 to 2002.
Okay. Now, I think we'll drop back to your upbringing before Peace Corps, long before Peace Corps. Where were you born and raised? Who were your parents, siblings, like that?
Well, I was born in Ponca City, Oklahoma, in January of 1978. My parents are Arnold Taylor and Alicia Dye. She was Taylor at the time. But my father was a research chemist for Conoco that has a refinery based in Ponca City. And my mother was a speech pathologist. And I'm not 100% whether she was working for the schools then or whether she was working through the guidance center, but she was employed as a speech pathologist at the time I was born. Ponca City is a town, I think it was about 24,000 people. Most of the people were employed at Conoco, a lot of them in the R&Ds. So we're talking chemists, chemical engineers, geologists, accountants, people that worked on that side of the refinery. Always thought Ponca City was a unique place because it was 2 hours from anywhere. So 2 hours to Wichita, 2 hours to Tulsa, 2 hours to Oklahoma City, which was good for the town because it means we had we developed our own businesses. We had I guess, quite fancy country club. We had swimming pools. We had golf courses. We had two lakes that were nearby. And I always remember the facilities at the school being fairly advanced and nice. Now, I don't know if I went back and looked at them now with my eyes, if it would look quite the same. And some of that stuff doesn't exist anymore. I think I had a conversation recently with someone where I basically said that the Ponca City of my youth doesn't exist anymore. There were extensive layoffs in the mid-'90s, and a lot of jobs moved either to Bartlesville or to Houston. And so it's simply not the same place now that it used to be.
That's right.
So you cannot visit it anymore.
Yeah. Well, you still have your memories anyway.
Yeah, I have my memories for what they may be worth.
Okay. Now, when you were growing up there, did you have in mind what you wanted to do, what you wanted to be eventually?
Well, I had a time where I thought I was going to go into the ministry as a United Methodist pastor. So I had some thoughts before I went to college that maybe I would go to college and then I'd go to seminary and I would become a United Methodist minister.
Did you feel you had the call?
I think there was a time I did. I mean, it certainly was something that was how it was described. Whatever your interest was, you would describe it as a calling, not as necessarily a personal choice. Right. Answering a call, because that would be the appropriate way to talk about it. Whether there's actually any real difference between that and anything else, at this point, I somewhat doubt. But certainly, due to the nature of the profession, that's what you'd say. Right. I think what I said at the time.
Okay. So, where did you go to college?
I went to Oklahoma State University, which was just 45 minutes away, 45 minutes south in Stillwater from Ponca City. Both my parents attended OSU. Both my parents have advanced degrees from OSU. I think I remembered recently telling someone that I did not like some of the people from my class who were going to OU. And so I was very much like, I don't want to go there if they're going there. But it was never really much of a question for me. OSU just seemed so natural because I'd heard so many stories about college from my parents, and it was nearby, and I was familiar with it. And I wasn't raised with aspirations college was college. It wasn't, at the time, I don't think I was sensitive to the difference between Ivy League colleges and private colleges and state schools and land grant schools, and just wasn't raised in an environment where that was that I understood the finer distinctions between those.
Were you a frat boy?
No, I wasn't actually. I was very anti-Greek.
Oh,
at
you
the
were.
time. Yeah, I just had no interest. I remember I have a particular story. I remember because they were recruiting. I had a good GPA. I was an honors student. I don't know if that was obvious, but I got calls from some frats to see whether I was interested. And I remember particularly a guy calling me and saying, well, maybe I'd like to come talk to you, maybe take you out to lunch, tell you about a frat. And so I said, okay, well, I might be open to that. So we started discussing on the phone how he would find me. And he had introduced himself as saying that he was from a frat, and he talked about their academics and how studious they were and upstanding and community-minded and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, sure. And then he was asking how to come to my house. Well, I actually lived outside of Ponca City. And Ponca City is in Kay County, in north central Oklahoma. And then there's the Arkansas River, which is to the east. But if you cross over the Arkansas River, you go into Osage County. And I actually lived in Osage County in a housing addition across the Arkansas River. And down the street on Highway 60, there was a very large and ostentatious strip bar known as Sadie's. And so I was talking to him about where I lived and how to get there. And he said, oh, well, that's just you turn left before you get to Sadie's, which sort of undermined, I think, the pitch he tried to give me about how studious and upstanding and community-minded he was, because at the time I thought, well, okay, you know where the strip bar is.
But there are intellectuals at Sadie's too, right?
How would I know? How would I know?
Right.
I wouldn't be my choice of a place to go to have much of a conversation. So.
No. All right. So, what did you study at OSU? I
studied English. So.
Is that the main thing?
It's just
That was your major?
Bachelor of Arts in English is the degree I got. I never changed my major. It was always English.
What'd you think?
Go ahead.
What'd you think you were going to do with an English?
I was going to go to seminary. Right? I was always going to go to graduate school of some sort. So having an undergraduate degree in anything, it was a transition to graduate school.
Yeah.
So I got many questions over the period of time. Well, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? And there was never, just like that question, there was never an answer. Well, I was going to go to some more schools. What I was going to do.
Yeah. Right. So it didn't really matter. Why not major in something you liked?
It was a liberal arts education. I spent a lot of time focused on. I read a lot of books. I took philosophy classes. I took psychology classes. No, I took ancient Greek.
Good.
I think looking back, I was quite fortunate to just be able to pursue what appeared interesting to me at the time. And I did not have a goal there was no practical element in the sense that I was trying to learn something in order to achieve anything other than continue to make good grades and score high on tests I took.
And you enjoyed it?
Well, I was good at that. I did well. I made good grades and I scored high on tests, and that was what my life had been for 12 years. So
why not continue?
Well, that's all I knew. So I was going to continue to study and make good grades and score high on tests, and until till that stopped, I guess.
And when did you graduate?
I graduated from high school.
No, from college.
From college in 2000.
In 2000.
I graduated in May of 2000.
Okay. And when you had your degree, what did you think you'd do then?
Well,
go to seminary?
I decided I was not going to go to seminary during my time in college. So there was a period of time I decided I was not going to go that route. And I started thinking about other things I might want to do. And this was probably about the time I started thinking about, well, maybe I'll join the Peace Corps. I want to learn a second language, and I'd like to see what the United States looks like from outside. I lived my entire life in Oklahoma. I hadn't ever traveled internationally. But it was just a thought of, well, let's try something interesting and have an adventure and learn a second language, because I had really admired people who could speak second languages. And I talked about taking this Greek class. It was a very small class. It's about 5 or 6 people, and every semester we would have like a party that the professor would host this dinner party at his house. And
that's nice.
He'd have it catered, and he'd have drinks. And most of the people in that class had international experiences, and they'd sit around and talk about, well, there was a particular, I remember there was one guy he was studying archaeology, and he spent several times going to Israel and going on digs in Israel. And the Greek professor would talk about his travels in Europe, and I didn't have any short stories to share. So, but I enjoyed listening. But I'd sit there and listen, and I had nothing to offer to participate. So perhaps that was some of the things that motivated me to say, well, I'd like to have an experience like that myself.
So how did Peace Corps come into all of this?
Well, I think there was a presentation on campus. I think I attended some event on campus in which the Peace Corps was discussed.
Like recruiters who were there?
I think recruiters came in. I don't have specific memories of that event, but I suspect that's how it happened.
Because you can't think of any other source?
Well, I don't know where else it would be.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
There wasn't the internet.
No.
Peace Corps didn't run ads on TV. There was likely some type of notice posted. Although there was email, it wasn't formally. There wasn't the kind of formal. Well, like nowadays, you would think you get all these notices and everything goes through email. But at those days, in the late '90s in OSU, email wasn't a primary. I mean, the first year I was at OSU, we didn't even enroll online. We had to go down to the student union and stand in line with our cards and our classes and books. So I mean, it was a transition period because we had high-speed internet in the dorm, but we weren't using it for the day-to-day operations. So I think I learned about it through a posting or an event that was at OSU. And
have you tried to recall if there was a recruiter who came and talked to you?
I do not recall.
Okay.
But I remember filling out the application, and in those days it was paper application, so you had to fill it out by hand or type it if you wanted to get a typewriter. And I think I filled mine out by hand. And
was it a pretty lengthy process to fill that out? I've talked to some who said that it went on and on and on, and others who said it was not much.
Well, the application wasn't difficult itself. The application process did take months and months. I found that to be it was a difficult process just bureaucratically. I think something that I think other Peace Corps volunteers say this is that we may not have been the brightest and the best Americans, but we were the healthiest because that was the most rigorous part of the process, was getting the clearance for the health side of it. Because I had to go and get a physical, I had to submit dental records. One of the things that was a problem is that I had been treated for a condition that's called TMJ.
I know what that is.
Because I had popping in my jaw when I would chew. And so I was wearing this plastic mouth guard when I slept. And Peace Corps was very concerned about that because I don't really know why, but the specialist, the dentist in Tulsa who was treating me, would not sign letters just basically releasing me from treatment. I think Peace Corps wanted to say that I could travel, that I wouldn't need to have treatment when I went in
for
service.
TMJ.
Yeah, for TMJ. There wasn't going to be any kind of regular dental treatment for TMJ. And so I had to return to my family dentist that I'd seen my entire life in Ponca City and ask him. I'm very grateful to him. I would not have been in the Peace Corps if it weren't for Dr. James DeRay,
Isn't that amazing? Wow.
Because he took the time to gather the x-rays, and he wrote a letter to the Peace Corps saying that I did not need regular treatment and that basically my condition was stable.
Mm-hmm.
And he said the right things that lifted the flag from my application, and it was like a month or so after that, which would have been April, May of 2000.
2000.
Probably
Mm-hmm.
March or April, because I remember it was before I graduated
Okay.
college.
So at that time, when you filled it out, you were pretty gung-ho at that point. You would have been quite disappointed had you been turned down.
Oh, I think I went through several bouts of tears during the process. I began the application in November. So, I mean, I have a letter right here, November 12th, 1999, which is the letter acknowledging the submission of my application and saying they've been accepted for processing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I mean, I really had thought it was going to be the TMJ issue was going to gum everything up. So
That must have made you kind of angry, didn't it? To think that something like that would destroy your chance.
I don't recall. I don't recall
Reacting
having
that
that
way.
feeling. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, here it was April 21st, 2000. That's when I got my letter saying congratulations.
You're in?
I was invited. Yes, with great pleasure that we invite you to begin training for Peace Corps service. You will be joining thousands of Americans who are building stronger communities around the world. And
No, that's a neat letter to have. I wish I had mine, but I don't.
yeah, I have. I kind of put together a binder of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now, did they ask you during the application process what countries you'd like to serve in?
At the time that when I went for my interview, which was shortly after my application, so it's probably November, December,
Okay.
I went for my interview in Dallas. I had to drive down to Dallas, park in an office building there, and go up several floors to meet with the Peace Corps recruiters.
Mm-hmm.
And during that, they had an interview with me where basically I think they were trying to test how comfortable was I with a certain amount of privation. You know, do I need to have to shower every day? Is running water essential? And sort of my feelings about these things. What about eating food? And they told me that the way it would work is I would need to select a region. So there's basically like Eastern Europe, Africa, South America,
Mm-hmm.
Southeast Asia, that these were the areas that I could choose. And then they would assign me a country within that
Mhm.
region. And so it's sort of a priorities. They said that because I only qualified for the English teaching track, so I qualified for English teaching track based on my degree,
Mm-hmm.
and I had taken Spanish in high school. So I had Spanish background, but they said that there weren't any English teaching positions in South America. Because I sort of associated Peace Corps with either Africa or South America.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if it's between Africa and South America, I have some Spanish background and perhaps South America. But they told me that I wouldn't qualify for any position in South America because they weren't accepting English teaching volunteers. It's mainly health, and business, and agriculture.
I see. So it was either going to be English teaching or nothing.
Yes, that's what I was qualified for. And after my application, I think they sent me a letter saying it was, I'm pleased to nominate you to the following Peace Corps assignments: English teaching, and then there's a program number.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's what I was able to do. So I thought, well, I really want to experience the local culture, and it'd be nice if I were somewhere that people didn't necessarily know immediately that I was not local. And so I thought, well, Eastern Europe fits my complexion, so why not Eastern Europe? I really know nothing about it, but I might be able to blend in, so let's try that. So that was my first pick.
Did What were the countries? Do you remember the countries in Eastern Europe that you might have wound up in?
Ukraine, Western or Eastern Russia, Moldova. I think those were the main ones. Belarus, maybe. I don't remember for sure if Belarus
Okay.
was.
Did you know anything about any of those countries at that time?
Not really, other than they'd been behind the Iron Curtain. I'm old enough for that. Remember that phrase.
Behind the Iron Curtain, and they were communists.
They were
right?
communists.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you understood that if you went to any of those countries, you would be living with communists.
Well, I don't know that I understood that. I mean, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990, 1991. It was... We won the Cold War, right?
The Berlin Wall.
It was more like, the Berlin Wall had come down in, 89, I think.
Yeah.
It was... Germany had been reunified. That's one of the things I tell my son. We recently took a trip to Germany, and I was trying to explain to my son, well, there was a time that Germany was divided into two countries.
Mm-hmm.
And there used to be a country called Yugoslavia. There used to be a country called Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
And that the map is always changing. But I think the thing is, I didn't necessarily think these are communist countries, but I thought they were legacy communist countries.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense
That's a good way to put
it. Their legacy, what they are now, of course, is in flux. Although I think I did remark on the fact that I had thought, at least my impression, and I haven't done any recent research on this, but my certain impression was part of the purpose of the Peace Corps when John F. Kennedy created it was to send Americans into countries to fortify personal relationships and relationships with the country as a whole. In the sense that it was sort of citizen ambassadors, or sort of just creating infrastructure and relationships. So we get the skills and the contact with Americans who come back and understand those countries. Those countries also have a closer relationship to the United States, but had to be a part of fighting the Cold War, because you didn't want countries to align more with the Soviet Union than with the United States. And so I thought it was remarkable that it looked like we were going to, into what was part of the Soviet Union. Because my original assignment was supposed to be in Ukraine.
Oh.
So I was going to go to Ukraine in September of 2000. But over the summer, or maybe slightly earlier than that, Peace Corps actually called me and said, well, would you like to leave earlier? Because we have a group that's leaving to go to Russia and in August. And at the time I was like, that's great. I'm kind of just biding my time. What am I supposed to do with myself? I know I'm leaving in September. I can't get a job. There's nothing else. I'm just kind of hanging out.
Yeah.
I did have a job over that summer before. I was living in an apartment at Crately Apartments in Norman that two of my friends leased during the school year. They were both gone for the summer, so I was just sort of subletting their apartment, living there, and working as a census enumerator. Because it was 2000, so it's for the 2000 census. So I was going around different places like Emerald Green Apartments and knocking doors and trying to chase down people who hadn't answered their census.
Yeah.
So, but that was going to run out, and the semester was going to start, and it's like, well, why not? Let's just Ukraine, Russia, it's the same to me.
So you accepted their offer to go early.
Yes, I asked that I be moved up and leave in August.
Okay, August of 2000.
Of 2000.
All right. And did you have a pretty good idea at that time what you would be doing? You would be teaching English at some school in Russia.
I knew I was going to Russia. I was an English volunteer. I guess my thought was I had formulated a vision of working in some kind of high school or VOTEC or some type of public institution where I would teach English. That was how I viewed it.
Okay.
But no one told me that. That wasn't explained to me by anyone. No one actually said what I would be doing other than to give me a designation as being in the English teaching program.
Okay.
But that's what I what did I know from my past? Well, I'd taken Spanish in high school, not grade school. Right?
Yeah.
I had been a student in a public school, so I just didn't really have the material to imagine anything any different.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Now, after you announced to your family and friends that you were going to be a Peace Corps volunteer in Russia, did any of them react negatively?
Well, my parents didn't. My parents were supportive. My uncle, my maternal uncle, tried to talk me out of it. He really represented it as, why would you waste 2 years of your life?
Is that what he said? Waste?
Waste. They did. Said it was, why would you waste 2 years of your life? You know, you can go get experience doing something else. I mean, he even proposed some other programs that perhaps I'd want to enter, you know, go into graduate school and do some study abroad or have something related to that, but I needed to be doing something in school or in the workforce, not...
Yeah, you're getting no credit for this.
Just not just going and volunteering. He thought that didn't make sense. So he and my aunt had some discussions with me, and I don't really remember if my grandparents supported them or not. But I'd already made my decision. I mean, I'd fought hard to get cleared medically. I mean, there was no changing my mind at this point, because I'd already invested a lot of emotional energy in trying to make this happen, and I didn't have another plan.
Did you get any feedback from people who said the communists are the enemy? Why do you want to go and...
You know, actually, there was never a particular reaction to where I was going. It was more of just reaction that, other than just joining the Peace Corps, was thought of as mainly, why would you do that? Whether it was in Russia or whether it was in Ghana.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
Wherever. It wasn't... I don't remember any reaction to the place.
Okay. So, you were accepted along with several others who were going to go and train in the same city, I guess.
Yeah, the way it worked is that we were all to assemble in Washington, D.C. I think we were there for a day or two. So I remember I got on a plane. Well, I came and stayed at a motel in Oklahoma City the night before I was to fly out.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't sleep
at
all.
I know.
Got on a plane the next day, flew to Washington, D.C., landed there, and I think we had a meeting at, I don't know where it was, somewhere in Washington, D.C. We had a meeting with all the volunteers.
How many were there about?
80.
Oh, pretty good size. Yeah.
I think, well, we ultimately swore in 80. There were probably slightly more than that at the actual, in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Because we did have, there was particularly, I remember hearing that there was one girl who got on the plane in D.C., flew all the way to Russia, and the next day said, I can't do this, send me home.
Oh, wow.
And left.
Gosh. Huh. So you were there for a couple of days, and do you remember any of that?
Well, I remember that I hadn't slept the night before, so some of the people wanted to go out and drink that first day, and I didn't. I went back to the motel or hotel where we were staying. I was too exhausted.
Yeah.
So they went out, and I went and slept. And then I think we had some more orientation the next day, and then we ended up in going out to Ronald Reagan International Airport, getting on our plane to fly to Russia. All 80 plus of us.
Wow, must have been something.
Yeah, it certainly was. I remember particularly that we landed in Frankfurt to change planes, and I had never been to Europe, so when we came down under the clouds, landing at Frankfurt, I remember looking out the window and saying, "Oh my gosh, it's real! This is Germany. I've heard about this place, but I've never seen it." So we landed at Frankfurt, which is, of course, a much busier airport than Will Rogers, and kind of ushered us through all the really, really busy concourses until we got down to this fairly small little holding room, because they actually bussed us out to the plane. They didn't have jet. They didn't have like the jet connector, jetway, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
We come down and get to the plane. We had to get on buses, and they bus us out to the plane that would fly us to Russia. So I kind of felt like it was we were in a special holding place for the kind of people that would travel to Russia, and continue to feel that way because we'd gone from very busy airports, Ronald Reagan, Frankfurt, until we got to Sheremetyevo, which was the airport in Moscow, the international airport.
Mm-hmm.
When we arrived there, I remember coming off the plane, and one of the first things I saw was a Russian policeman, and they have sort of a similar military caps that we have, but they're larger. They just look larger.
Oh, I've
so there's
seen
a much
that,
larger military cap, and going into Sheremetyevo and thinking how silent it was, how quiet, how few people there were there. Now, past that place, I mean, having recently traveled to Germany and back, there is something kind of quiet, especially quiet about that. Off the plane, going through passport control, where it's not a very boisterous or busy or talkative place.
Uh-huh.
And in Russia, it certainly wasn't. But even when we exit out into the airport, it had a much more diminished sort of feeling. There was not a lot of people there. They had like one big hall with the flights displayed up on these electronic boards.
Yeah.
Not the LCD screens, but like just sort of the
I know what you mean.
With the individual lights, sort of the dot matrix type display.
So where did your group go then?
Well, we got on buses and drove to Zeleningrad, which means Green City.
Do you mean Leningrad, Russia?
No, Zeleningrad.
Oh.
Zelen means greens. Zeleny means green, like the color. So Zeleningrad, Grad of course means city, right? So Zeleningrad. Zeleningrad is a suburb of Moscow.
Okay.
It actually was sort of how they describe it. It's not the Silicon Valley of Russia, but it was the computer manufacturing area, in the 80s for Russia. A lot of the computer manufacturing had really disappeared by the time we went there. But we got on these buses, drove it was probably a 40-minute ride out to Zeleningrad, and they brought us to, there was a business school where we were going to have our training for 10 weeks. So they brought us to the business school, and all of our different host families were there to pick us up and take us back.
What was your bus ride like?
Well, they had these charter
Because you're getting first impressions on this bus.
Well, first of all, one of the things, they were these charter buses, kind of like charter buses here. They weren't the normal type of public transit buses. But I remember looking out of the window. One of the things about Russia that's interesting is that where they have the electric poles, very few of them generally are wooden. They're concrete. So these concrete electric poles, I thought that was kind of remarkable. I hadn't really seen concrete electric poles here.
Yeah.
The other thing that was really remarkable is that all the high-rise apartment buildings. I mean, I'm from Ponca City, Oklahoma. At time in Stillwater, at time in Norman. It's unusual to have anything that's more than one story tall.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these multi-story apartment buildings. The other thing I was sort of surprised is how many sort of kind of, I want to call them just sort of like shacks or like tin metal buildings that they had kind of along the road on the way out there. It really reminded me of driving through southeastern Oklahoma at the time. We were going through, and back in those days, you drive through southeastern Oklahoma and you have people with these tin metal outbuildings.
Vendors, right? Vendors. Who were in those metal buildings?
Well, I don't remember seeing people selling anything. They were just these kind of, I guess my thought was, it didn't seem very fancy. It seemed kind of ramshackle and thrown together and temporary and a little less refined than I expected.
Yeah.
And it reminded me again of driving through southeastern Oklahoma, which was never known for its opulent wealth.
No.
Well, up until now, when you have things like, you have Hochatown and those Beavers Bend and those areas now, they're actually quite developed. But my grandmother lived in. My grandparents were in Hugo, Oklahoma. That's where my parents both graduated high school, and it was never very polished. So it kind of had this moment. I remember having this feeling on, oh my gosh, this kind of reminds me of Hugo, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I mean, not in the high rises, but just some of the decay.
Yeah.
I think that was really it. It had this feeling of decay.
Okay. So that was. It was. You weren't expecting it, but it was something that you'd seen before.
Yeah. Well, that's what one of the things about memory, or I think anything, is that I only had so much to draw on, right, to compare what I was seeing, and so I would, in order to make sense of it, I would think about something that was familiar.
Sure.
So it's one of those things. Is if I had to go through it again, or I had to see it again, who knows what my eyes would see now? But at the time, that was my impression. Was this kind of looks like some of the decayed areas in southeastern Oklahoma? What's going on with this? Now, of course, it didn't look like that when we got back into the city. It was just sort of this in-between portion between Sheremetyevo and Zeleningrad. And we didn't drive through Moscow proper. We're already kind of on the, like any airport, it's on the outside of town.
Right.
And we were going to another, to a suburb.
So how long did you stay there, and what did you do, your group of 80?
We were there for 10 weeks, and we were going through mainly language classes. We would have these sessions.
So you were going to learn Russian?
Yeah, I was trying to learn Russian.
Okay.
Went through language classes. The language classes were very frustrating because they did not want to teach us grammar. They just said, look, just we're going to teach you as many words as we can, and then you just try to figure it out. At least that was my impression of it. I wanted to learn how to translate what I wanted to say and say it in Russian. Well, they didn't want to teach us that way. They wanted you to just try, just work at it. Don't try to understand the grammar. Just do your best. And I think even looking back at it now, I mean, that's not an effective way to learn Russian. Russian's complicated.
Sure.
I mean, first of all, one of the things about Russian is it doesn't have the same tense system that we do. It has basically what we call imperfect and perfect. So other things are either complete or incomplete. There are two forms of every verb. Verbs have to agree in if you're speaking in the past. It has to agree in number, or if it's singular, it has to agree in gender. So, for example, if I said, I took the cup, right, I'd say, я взял стакан. But if I were a woman, I'd say, я взяла стакан. You'd have the A on the end, взяла, so я взял. And
meaning you're a woman saying this?
When you use a verb, it has to agree with the noun. If it's the past tense of a verb, it has to agree in gender with the noun. So if I am a man, then I would use verbs. Say я ходил, like я ходил в магазин, I went to the store. My wife would say я ходила в магазин.
Oh, okay.
And the other thing about Russian is it's inflected language, so there are multiple endings based on what the function of the word in the sentence is. I usually say that is that, and it was hard for us to hear, even like my name, because my name would change depending on how it was used in a sentence. So let's say, for example, my name's Evan. So be Evan, but then you say, if I see Evan, я вижу Evana. I see Evan. Still saying I see Evan. Я вижу Evana. I went with Evan. Я ходил с Evanom. I wrote a letter to Evan. Я написал письмо Evanu.
Oh my God, that's awful.
It was. I couldn't even recognize my name sometimes. And my teacher would say things in Russian. Or she would say things like in Russian. You don't say. Well, we I'd say you and I, or my wife and I did something. In Russia, you say we and the person. And so our teacher all the time would say "мы с вами, мы с вами, мы с вами, мы с вами," and "мы с вами" means we with you, in the plural you. Swami. I heard Swami, right? My ear heard Swami. It's not Swami. It's Swami. Swami. But it was this constant, just sort of trying to tune my ear to even be able to hear what was going on in the sentence. So this actually led to a lot of problems later, because I always try to explain it this way, even in a practical matter, right? With how these cases, they're called, the inflections, affect the language. If I go to a store and I want a can of green beans, so a can of green beans means banka, can. Banka, zelenik goroshek, green beans. If in Russia, at the stores, it wasn't what we call, they call it self-service. They didn't have self-service where you could just pick products and put it in a bag. You had to ask for it behind a counter. And I actually come back to that because it's a good way to also talk about why it was difficult. But if you ask for it at the counter, if I come and I say, Banka zelenik goroshek, if I could even say that, which you can kind of hear, it's like, how do you even say that? Banka zelenik goroshek. It's like going to the counter and saying, the can of green beans. I mean, if you're standing behind the counter, I said, the can of green beans, you'll say, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
What do you mean, the can? What can? Why can? Because you're supposed to say, banku, because you have, it's understood you're saying, dайте мне, give me, dайте мне, пожалуйста, banku, give me a can of green beans. And if you don't say banku, when you're asking for it, even if you're just saying banka, the person behind the counter is like, they don't understand what you meant. So, and this is compounded by the fact that when I first arrived there were still these old-style Soviet stores. And the way a Soviet store would work is you had different departments, right? You have the bakery department, the sausage, the canned goods, the vegetables, whatever. And they were numbered, because there was a centralized cash register. And so what you had to do is you had to go to let's say, the department that had the bread. You have to ask how much the bread costs. Let's say it's 5 rubles for the loaf. Then you have to go to the cash register and tell them basically $5 for department 2, which is the bakery. You have to give, or 5 rubles. And they would give you a receipt for that deal with that department. You have to take the receipt back and then give it to the person, and that's for the bread, and they would tear the receipt and give you the bread. I mean, the linguistic, what you'd have to be able to say and how you'd be able to say it just really was complicated. So it was an exercise in optimism on Peace Corps' part that 10 weeks could do anything for us to really help us function in such a complex linguistic environment.
How much of your time during the 10 weeks was spent on learning the language?
Most of it. We would have these sessions kind of in between. They'd bring in volunteers and talk to us. They'd talk about health concerns, like what to work, how to handle our health, how to operate. We were going to all get these water distillers to be able to distill water for drinking water at home. They talk about policies of the Peace Corps. They bring in, I remember they bring in volunteers who were dating Russians and have them talk about the dating environment.
That's good.
Give us sort of that information. I mean, here we are. Most of us were, in our early 20s, so this was important information for all of us.
It sure was.
So, anyway, those programs, I remember having those, and mostly the language.
So were you also trying to figure out how in the world am I going to teach English here? I've never done it before, so is there a guide? How do I do this?
I don't remember any time being spent on telling us how to teach English. There were 2 sets of volunteers there. We had English volunteers and we had business volunteers. So some of the people in my group were business track. They were there to help people, educate them on business practices.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are those who are from English. There might have been some sessions about how to teach English. I have no memory of spending any time. I mean, it was language classes, cultural education, and then standing in line for vaccines, because we got like a new vaccine like every week.
Wow.
So they were helping us follow all sorts of vaccines. And none of us came out with autism. So, I mean, proof.
Take that.
That's not how it works.
RFK.
Yeah, absolutely. None of us had autism by the end of it. So,
Huh.
or maybe not, I don't know.
Did you have any reaction at all to any of those?
The vaccines? No, I
Yeah.
don't remember anything. I mean, I
Yeah.
got really good at it. Got really comfortable with having needles stuck in my arm.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, 10 weeks. How did you feel at the end of the 10 weeks? Do you feel prepared?
But I was ready. I was ready to get started. So I mean, I always understood. I think it was a little bit bittersweet in the sense that we wanted to get to our assignments, but you know, I developed friendships with volunteers there. I spent
Sure.
a lot of time with a certain set of the other volunteers.
These became very good friends very quickly, right?
Yeah, it really was. I mean,
Yeah.
all we had was each other. I mean, this was before none of us were keeping up relationships on our phones.
Mm-hmm.
We were pretty much with our host families or with the group Peace Corps or going out together and drinking in bars. We spent a lot of time drinking beer and drinking champagne. There was a certain type of champagne, it's Sovietskaya Shampanskaya. It was like Soviet champagne. It came in, sladkaya, polsladkaya, and sukhoya, so like sweet, semi-sweet, and dry. And it was really cheap.
Yeah.
And it was fizzy and festive. So we drink a lot of Sovietskaya Shampanskaya.
Uh-huh. So there was good socialization going on among you. And that was going to come to an end here at the end of 10 weeks, and you were going to be dispersed. You weren't going to go with anyone. Is that correct? You were going to go off yourself.
They had an event about 7 weeks in which they brought in the sponsors from the various sites. And then we got to go back and visit.
What does that mean, sponsors?
Sponsor was the person who was going to be responsible for setting up our service there as like a local, so if someone was a director of a school or an owner of a language school or someone in a business program, they were like the sponsor of the volunteer.
So they were
the representative of the institution that was going to be responsible, because what our sponsors had to do was provide us an apartment or somewhere to live. Whether it's a dormitory with a host family or an apartment of our own. That was their requirement to having a volunteer, is to be able to provide housing.
Could you select that yourself, whether you'd stay with a family or whether you'd stay by yourself?
I don't think so. I mean, housing was always in Russia, there was this idea, probably still is the thing, where there's kvartirny vopros. It's like the apartment question. Housing was not in plentiful supply. I mean, most people lived in apartments, and most people lived with extended families. So we would have parents with small children, and one of their parents or both their parents. So housing was always a premium, even out in the provinces in Russia. So that was just a big deal for our sponsors to be able to provide a housing for us.
And they would facilitate your introduction to wherever you were going to teach and to the community at large, or am I overstating?
What do you mean? I don't understand the question.
The sponsor that you're talking about, was that person facilitating your introduction to wherever you were going to be teaching and wherever you were going to be living?
Yes, in the sense that person or the organization the person worked for was responsible for providing the apartment or wherever we're living. And usually that person was the supervisor or the person who'd be in charge of watching over or directing our work.
This is a Russian. This is not
Russian.
Peace Corps.
Not Peace Corps. Not
Okay.
associated, not employed by the Peace Corps at all. As I understand, I think that the way it worked in Western Russia is that you could apply for volunteers. Like, well, I want to have an American come as part of this program and work. And this is the job that we want them to do, and this is... Anyway, they requested us.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, I don't know that 100%, but I think that's probably how it works.
Did you get along with your sponsor very well?
Well, the first place, I was supposed to go to a town that's called Cheboksary, which is along the Volga, and it's part of Chuvashia, which is like the Chuvak Republic. I guess it's sort of an ethnic group that are slightly different. They're not, I don't know if they're not Slavic, but they weren't just Russians.
Mm-hmm.
And I was supposed to go there. I actually went and visited that site, but the visit didn't go very well. I spent a lot of time sitting in an office it was sort of at a Votech type place. I spent a lot of time sitting in an office. I really didn't like it. And when I came back, I reported how it was unpleasant. They had set me up actually with a host family for that visit. I was going to live in a dorm if I would have gone there, but they set me with a host family, and I was lavishly welcomed by this host family. I was this mother and this daughter.
Yeah.
But then I was also interrogated extensively about where was the money to pay for my visit.
You didn't.
I didn't have any money. No one told me I
didn't.
I had to bring any money. No one told me I was responsible for paying for anything.
Yeah.
And I remember my broken Russian trying to explain that I didn't have any money.
Oh my
There was
God.
no money. And I remember this very distinctly, even to the point the mother brings in the daughter who speaks kind of some English and tried to get her to explain to me. I don't even actually know at this point, looking back, I mean, maybe I didn't understand what they wanted from me or what they were asking from me. I certainly, at the time, took it as that they wanted to know who was going to pay for my visit. And they welcomed me lavishly.
Mm-hmm.
I had a wonderful meal. They provided me in a whole room for myself. I mean, it was lavish. And so I remember feeling kind of guilty. It's like, well, I mean, I don't have any control over this. It's
right.
I think they kind of grilled us to say, don't give people money. Don't just give people money for anything that they ask for.
Well, you got to give money to people who are putting you up.
Well, I think that was the responsibility of the sponsor, who I basically didn't see most of the time. But when I came back and explained what had happened, one of the ladies, who's a Russian lady who worked for the Peace Corps, just said, "Well, I think they could just take a break. They just won't have a volunteer this year." And because it was another volunteer who'd gone to the town that I ended up going to. Well, the town I ended up actually going for my service. There was a volunteer who went there, and then when she came back, she actually dropped out of the Peace Corps and went home. And so they reassigned me to Nizhny Novgorod, which was the town I actually went to serve in. And so I hadn't visited there when I was ultimately sent.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think they actually wanted a male. Because I ended up at a language school that was 100% female. It was actually a private language school that had offered paid services to like bank presidents and high-end businessmen and international
Wanting to learn better English
for trade purposes. I mean, they serviced various programmers and management at a local Intel office. Had several of the big banks in Nizhny were clients. Just fairly children, high school age kids of privileged Russians.
Mm-hmm.
So it really was a surprise to me, because we talked earlier about what I thought I was going to be doing. I thought I was going to be working for a public institution, kind of with just general people. I didn't think I was going to be working with fairly wealthy and elite Russians in this town, for paid services, because my boss was charging for the work I did. Now, that was just sort of a shock to me, because it's not what I expected. I think I was actually very, very lucky to be offered that job. Although it didn't initially fit what I defined as service and volunteerism, I think there was probably a more restrictive view of really what I was there to do, and I'm actually very grateful. Tatiana Nikolaevna was my sponsor. Her and her son Sergei Ginsburg. They actually treated me very well. They were very patient with me. I don't think I was what they wanted in a volunteer.
They wanted a woman.
I didn't expect a woman. I mean, I would have fit in better with everybody had I been a woman. I remember, I think I always say that we would have these staff meetings, and so there'd be all these, beautiful young women, and me.
Yeah.
And the head teacher would walk in, and she'd say, "Привет, девчонки," just like "Hello, girls." So it was just like I was just always one of the girls for a while, so I found it kind of emasculating. But
Did you ever, when you met them, you were introduced to them, did they look at you like, huh? What's he doing here?
the other teachers?
Yeah.
No, I think they were.
Because you're saying that you thought they expected a female.
Well, I think my director did. So the sponsor, the director of the language school, I think that knowing what the environment was, I think they'd expected a female, but they didn't have any choice. She quit, so they probably could have had me or no one at all.
Yeah.
And the other teachers, I don't think anyone looked at me like there was something wrong with me or I was there. I think they were very interested in testing their English on me and seeing what I had to say. I think they were very, very maternal, or like big sister-like to me when I was initially there.
But again, I'll get back to what I asked earlier, and that is, you didn't seem to have any kind of guidance, any kind of plan. Were you just going to start talking English to these people?
That's one of the reasons why I think I was very fortunate to go to the place I did, because the school is called Lingua Service Center, LSC, and they had a lot of resources. And in particular, they had this whole set of textbooks that were very well written, had a lot of materials that went with them, a lot of activities inside.
They were written in English, I guess.
They were written in English. It was a British company that had designed these textbooks, various levels, from beginner, intermediate high, advanced. Mm-hmm. And so I had a lot of resources to draw from to try to figure out how to run my classes and try to follow the workbooks. I was not a trained teacher. I was not as good as if I'd actually had some kind of background. I'd taken nothing in teaching. It was not a part of my background at all. And so I managed to live through what I had to do. I pity my students. I don't think that they got the most out of it, considering they were all paying for these classes. They would have been better off if they wanted to learn something practical. But it gave them a chance. I was the native speaker. I'd hear that all the time. I was a native speaker, and so that was the advantage, is you get to go and interact with the native speaker, hear me talk, deal with me.
Were they also interested in your opinion on world events and what the United States is really like as opposed to what we've heard?
I found that Russians really thought they knew everything already.
Oh,
they already
really?
knew what the United States was like. They watched our movies. They didn't really ask me about that. One of the things Russians were very interested in, though, is what I thought about Russia. For example, this is something that I found quite remarkable. It was that more than once I'd have someone come to me and say, "Oh, well, we like Metallica, we like Judas Priest, we like AC/DC." I mean, of course, those are not all American bands, but we like this Western music.
Yeah.
Tell me what Russian music do you listen to in the United States? And I'd be like, none. I've never heard any in my life until I got here. And they were just kind of in shock. Because in Russia you hear Italian music and French music and of course all these Western music in English, and they were just aghast that we weren't listening to any of their music. And they're very proud of their pop culture. Now, of course, it would be easier if they'd asked me about, well, what books did you read? Because we certainly do read Russian literature in the West, but we do not listen to their pop culture.
Yeah.
So I did not know any of their bands, and I couldn't validate anybody with what I knew or what I thought about it.
That's kind of embarrassing for you, right?
Well, it was awkward because they were so. There was always moments when I'd have this conversation more than once, and it would happen where they were confused. They didn't know whether to chalk it up to that I was some kind of rube and just it was like a personal failing on my part of not being cultured enough to listen to their music in the United States, or accepting the fact that there's no radio play for Russian artists in the top 40 radio in the United States. It just wasn't. MTV, they had MTV in Russia. They had their own MTV shows. They played their own videos. I can't say that, and they would have all the 90s rap and stuff that was being played on MTV at those times. But in the United States, it was just 100% rap at that time. There wasn't any Russian music. There wasn't any French music, no Italian music. So it was all either East Coast, West Coast rap.
Now, you played a guitar, is that right?
Yeah, I did. I played guitar, and I actually played in a metal band. I met a guy. I think you asked me earlier about whether I was going by myself to any location, whether we would be going out. Nizhny Novgorod's like a town of 1.5 million people. There's a lot of people there. We had four volunteers who were assigned to Nizhny, and so I had there were 2 other girls that I was actually had a lot of interaction with, Lindy and Carrie, and they worked at this school, or adjacent with this school. It's called the Vyshaya Shkola Ekonomiki, which is like the higher school of economics, and there was a computer lab, because this is back in the day of computer labs, internet cafes and stuff. But there was a computer lab, and they had a guy that was sort of the director of the proctor or manager, I don't know what you call it. He was the guy, computer lab guy, and his name was Koya Mishakov, and I met him by visiting Vyshaya Shkola Ekonomiki with Carrie and Lindy, and he played in a band. He was a bass player in a metal band. We kind of hit it off talking about metal music, and so we talked about that and ended up going to visit his, they call it Tochka. It's kind of like means point. It's like the hangout place, which was in this large room next to a crematorium. It was an abandoned crematorium, but I mean, where else would you play metal but right next to a crematorium? It was very appropriate location.
And that's where you'd practice?
Yeah, it's like in the basement of this old building that was near the center of Nizhny.
Did you ever perform?
No, we never. No, we never performed. We basically just practiced. I never actually got.
Did you like going?
I
like being in the band?
I mean, yeah, it gave me a chance to. One of the things that was very important to me, because I had to spend every day, almost all day long, with women, is I wanted to do something with men. Yeah. I actually really got to the point. I thought, man, I want to spend time with dudes, and I wanted to learn Russian. And so, spending all my time with English teachers, all they want to do is speak English to me.
Yeah.
And so, it was a great opportunity for me to go and try to spend time around people who didn't speak English to me. Try to learn Russian, and.
But you just have to do it as you hear it. I mean, and they were not there to teach you Russian. They were just speaking Russian.
Yeah, well, that was my chance for interaction. I'll tell you this: I had a lot of other resources. Peace Corps provided a allowance to hire a private teacher,
English good.
Teacher. So Nizhny has a linguistics university, and so I was connected with a girl there. It was Olga Kuznetsova was her name, and she was my English teacher for the entire time I was in Nizhny. I got a
When you say your English teacher,
I'm sorry, English Russian teacher.
Yes.
Sorry.
I was wondering.
I'm getting ahead of myself because there's some things I wanted to say about it. She was my Russian teacher, so repetitor, русского языка. So she's my Russian private teacher. So she taught me. I also got an opportunity because of the Linguistics University. They had a program that certain students took that was like Russian as a foreign language.
Uh-huh.
And so I was sort of the practice case where I got to go in several times a week and have a series of very beautiful young women come in and teach me Russian.
Ooh, nice.
Week after week
nice.
after week after week. I also spent enormous amounts of time. I went home. I had this green grammar book of Russian, and I would go home every night and work on it. I mean, I worked on Russian every night for the first year. I wanted to speak Russian so badly.
You sound like a real type A. Is that right?
I've studied English. I was completely deprived of my power. I couldn't buy things. I mean, this was not just for extra gratification. I needed to survive, and I'm gonna have people in stores that tell me to get out, go away, come back when I speak Russian.
Really? They said that too?
Yeah, they said, get out of here, young man.
Huh.
Come back when you speak Russian. So.
So you were in quite a predicament there. Interacting with Russians, but not really knowing the language very well.
The language was
so
very
you had
hard.
one choice, and that's learn the language.
Yeah. Well, I spent a lot of effort on it, and by the first year, after I'd been there a year, I was much more functional.
Did you ever take a standardized test in the language the way we did? It was called a foreign service, and it was from 1 to 5. If you were 1, you were hardly literate at all. If you were 5, you were fluent. You teach that?
I did. Well, okay. I don't know if I took a standardized test. Years later, after I came back to the United States, I applied for the FBI. And part of my application for the FBI included a language test related to Russian, which they called me up, and I had 2 Russian speakers evaluate me. I think I scored a 3
on the foreign service.
I don't know if it's the foreign service. Whatever exam when you told me that there is a range from 1 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
I've never taken any other test other than that oral test I took with for the FBI, and they scored it on a 1 to 5.
Okay.
They gave me a 3.
That's probably what it was then. Well, that's good. That's I never got to be a 3. I got to be a 2+, and then I topped out. So, you had several tutors, you said.
Yeah, I participated in this this Russian as a second language exercise with all of the students who were learning, who would come and teach me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that didn't go on forever. It wasn't even the whole 2 years. But I took lessons from Olga all 2 years I was there.
Did you date any of your tutors?
No. No, it was just, that was about language.
Okay, all right. Were you dating anybody? Or did you want to?
I mean, I was surrounded by women all the time. I mean, I said, it was...
You had your choice.
Well, maybe so. I think in Russian they would call this thing there's a verb called gulyats. It means like to stroll, but they use it like you spend time with someone, like гуляет с кем-то. I mean, I went on some walks with some girls I met.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I think it's worth saying that my wife is Russian. I met her there.
Oh,
so
when you were in that town?
When we worked together at Linguist Service Center. So, I met her there. I think it took me the first year. I remember in particular, I think I had a chance to invite her out. We at the language center that we had, there was a section that was sort of like a snack bar. Mm-hmm. And so some of the teachers would sit there and prepare. And so she would often be there at the same time I was. And so I talked to her, I think even fairly soon after I arrived. And I remember particularly, we had a conversation about different slang related to going to bars. Mm-hmm. Like we talk about beer on tap, draft beer, just sort of things. What would you use as sort of bar slang? And I talked to her about that. And she goes, "Oh, I'm very interested. I'd love to learn that." I said, "Well, maybe I'll take you to the bar sometime and we'll talk about it." And then I didn't follow. She's like, "Oh, that would be great." And I didn't follow up with it at all. So kind of let that slide. And but eventually, near the end of the 2 years, we started spending a lot more time together. So, and actually, it was kind of I left. At the time, I wasn't completely sure, where that relationship would go. I mean, I had to go back to the United States after my 2 years were up. So.
You didn't think about extending at all?
No, it really wasn't. It wasn't really an option. Peace Corps started having some problems in Russia during my second year. There was a political shift in the Russian government. Putin had been elected very shortly around the time I actually arrived. I think that in 2000.
Oh, huh.
And by 2002, some of our volunteers were having difficulty getting their visas renewed. We had several people that couldn't come back.
Why were they having trouble?
I don't really know. There's always been concern with Peace Corps that they are, CIA, or somehow American intelligence. We had some volunteers who were older, they were in their 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. And a couple of them who didn't get renewed to come back. Their visas weren't renewed. We had two of the girls that were in Nizhny with me, American girls, had some problems getting their visas renewed. I wasn't really sure if that was going to affect me or not. So extension just... In fact, the group that came in after us that in 2002 didn't complete their service, they were all ejected. Yeah, I think it was probably in 2003.
Did you have any discussions with your Peace Corps friends during this time, speculating that maybe they're trying to get us out of here? With the advent of Putin?
Well, it really wasn't tied to Putin. We had discussions just about Russia was just a very difficult place to be. There were lots of rules. Like you, as a foreigner, we were told we couldn't stay anywhere. If you couldn't stay anywhere longer than 3 days without registering. You had to register that you were there, and you get a stamp on your visa or in your passport. So movements were controlled quite a bit.
Was that for everybody or just Americans?
It applies to everyone, but not the same way. Like in the sense that you have to register. You have to register even as a Russian, but not if you're. It's not as restrictive in the sense that foreigners had to report. You have to go down to. There was an office called Avir, and I don't remember what it stands for. But Avir was like this administrative office, and every time when you'd arrive, you'd have to go down to Avir and go through the process of registering your address. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot of standing in line and having the right forms, and if you didn't register in time, you'd have a fine, and then you couldn't pay the fine at the Avir. You'd have to go to Sberbank and pay on a certain account, and then bring the receipt back to the one that you registered. But if you have to wait in line too long, every day the fine goes up. So you could end up having. I mean, it was just a real hassle. So I think the thing is some hassling over visas or hassling over registrations was just part of life. So we didn't take it as necessarily a shift in Russia. It was just, that's part of life in Russia. It was just administratively difficult to get things like that done.
Now, you and your future wife were trying to decide toward the end of your stay, is she going to come with me, or?
No, I don't think we ever actually had that discussion that she was going to come with me. I think kind of left it open. So when I came back, she came and visited me. But then
wow.
we didn't decide. I mean, I didn't propose until I actually went there later.
Went
back to visit. Yeah,
Yeah.
I went back to visit. I think it was the summer after my first year in law school.
Uh-huh.
So I went back and visited and then proposed, and it took until kind of the end of before she actually took 9 months to go through the process here to get her a visa to come to get married. Then we got married in 2004. Yeah, I've been married for 20 years.
20 years, yeah. Was her English very good?
That was excellent.
How was she able to have such excellent English
She had,
before she met you?
well, she had been quite involved. Of course, the English instruction in Russia, especially at the Linguistics University, was top notch.
Mm.
She was part of the American Center there that focused on American style English, because that's one thing you'd run into in Russia too. Is that, but some Russians had learned British English and some Russians had learned American English. The other thing is she had been quite involved with various American missionaries who had come and lived in Nizhny and gone to church with these missionaries, and so she'd had interactions with actual Americans and helped practice her English. But her English was excellent, always has been excellent. She never struggled with the language when she got here, and now she's actually she works for Oklahoma City Public Schools as a English language, I think it's called program administrator. She works with the English language teachers who teach the language learners.
Oh, that's neat.
Grade school.
That's great.
So,
Did let's see. I was going to ask you about your teaching. Did you ever consider yourself a teacher? And what you were doing was teaching? Or was it more informal?
well, I mean, certainly I led classes. I mean, I think it was hard. That was my job. I never had a love for it. My wife has a great love for teaching. She's a teacher. She's excellent at it. Watching her prepare for a lesson or deliver a lesson. I think that when I compare it to that, it's kind of like when people talk about musicians. I mean, I play the guitar, and sometimes I'll say, well, I'm a guitar player. I'm not a musician. Because musicians are the kind of people that can say, well, what key do you want me to play it in?
Yeah, yeah.
And you tell me the key, and I'll play it. And if you tell me to change the key during it, I'll do it. They have that kind of facility. My wife's that way with teaching. You call the tune, and she can play it however you want to do it. I was pretty much wrote. I could do it. I could get through it one way.
Yeah.
And if there were any kind of problems, I'd probably struggle. I just have to start over and do it the way that only way I know how. And still to this day, I'm just not a teacher.
Okay. Did you take any trips around Russia for your own edification, just because you could and because you wanted to?
Well, yeah, I did. I mean, I visited some other volunteers. Yeah, I spent a lot of time going to Moscow. I went to Ryazan because I knew I was friends with a volunteer who was stationed there. I had an opportunity to participate in a language camp that happened in Novosibirsk, which is in Siberia. So I took a 36-hour train ride from Moscow to Novosibirsk, and then went and worked at this language camp for a few weeks.
Was it in the winter?
No, it was in the summer, fortunately.
I was going to ask you about Russian winters.
Well, they're harder than Oklahoma boy, I'll tell you that. I wasn't used to that kind of cold. I wasn't used to that kind of snow, and I wasn't used to that kind of darkness. Which are things that I think northern northern countries, even countries that aren't quite as north as Russia. Like I said, we recently went to the Christmas markets in Germany, and I can see one of the reasons why we have this tradition coming out of the West with hanging lights and decorating with holly and red berries and stuff like that. This is like adds color and vibrancy to what is a very dark and dreary time of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And in Russia in particular, in Nizhny, which is a large city, we had all of these tall apartment buildings. And so you walk, I remember particularly, you walk along the sidewalk was covered in snow, and then there are big mounds of it on the edge in between the sidewalk and the street where they've pushed it out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like snow as high as my waist or my shoulders. Walking along in the snow, it's maybe 1 p.m., so it's the middle of, it's not quite the middle of the day, but here we are, the sun's so low in the sky that every time I walk behind a building, I'm in the shade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The wind is blowing, and it's nipping at my nose and my face and making my face feel numb. And I'm trying to avoid the black ice, because I'm not adept at walking on it.
Yeah.
Whereas you have Russian kids, you have little kids walking along and get to the black ice where there's no snow, and they'll just slide across it, and then just start walking again. But I'm an Oklahoma boy, and we have like 2 or 3 hours of winter, a few days a year, like that. So you can say an hour or two of winter every day in the winter. I mean, and it would stay about the same temperature, and the sunny days were the coldest days. I mean, give me an overcast day where, even if it was kind of wet, it would never be as cold, frigidly cold. I mean, it's like, I'm talking in Celsius, like negative 20 degrees, negative 25.
Did you stay up with your Peace Corps group?
Well, not brief. When I first got back, I visited a few of them that I was friendly with, but over the years, I don't have anyone nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people, like in general, congregated in large cities. I don't really live in a large city. Oklahoma City. One of the things I realized when I visit some of the Peace Corps volunteers is that in some ways Chicago is closer to LA than Oklahoma City is.
I know what you mean.
Because these people have interactions. They have businesses and connections and flights and activities between the major American cities that exist apart from those of us who live in this part of the country.
No, that's true.
So they seem to keep up. Now, I will say that we actually organized a Zoom meeting. I think it was Zoom or some type of video conference several times during COVID, where we got on line and talked. So,
have you been back to Russia at all?
I have. I've been back 3 times.
3 times. Did you go to your place? Is that why you went?
Yeah. Well, my wife, that's where she's from.
My mother lived. So of course.
So we would definitely go there, and every time I've gone back, that's been one related to seeing her or going back with her. And in the first, for pretty much the first half of our marriage, my wife would go back to Russia every summer, all summer long. I didn't always join her. I mean, obviously, but we did make some trips. We actually, I think the last time we were back was 2018.
Did you take your children?
Yeah.
What did they think of it?
Well,
get me out of here?
No, I don't think. Well, in particular, my son Andrew, when we took him back in 2018, we signed him up for this summer camp, kind of in the city, or summer program in the city. It was called there was something related to like psychological camp, psychological center was sponsored it or something. I don't really know if that meant that the kids were not all right or something, but he described it as he did not like it. He did not like the other children. He didn't like how he treated him. He did not like the interaction. He kept saying, "Why did you send me to this psychological camp?" what were you trying to do to me or whatever. And so he didn't like that, but
yeah.
But otherwise, it's never been unpleasant. It's changed a lot, just like we talked about. My town, Ponca City, you really can't visit it anymore. Russia of 2000 to 2002 does not exist anymore. You cannot go there.
In what ways?
In what ways? Well, the 90s were a particularly awful time for Russians. It was a time of extreme inflation, a lot of upheaval, a lot of people not getting paid, not being able to afford basic products, extreme price increases. And it was funny, I was talking to my wife earlier today. We went and bought a Christmas tree, and the Christmas tree was like $140. We said, oh, we remember when the trees were only $80. And I said, well, that's a mark of being, getting older. And you start telling people.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
she said,
it
well,
sure is.
She said, well, but in the 90s in Russia, it was like you would say that about prices last week. You say, well, last weekend this was only this price,
wow.
Because that's how dramatic the price increases would be. So, okay, the point is that when I was in Russia, it was still very much transitioning from Soviet structures to whatever you want to call it today.
I don't know what you call it.
And the thing is that what I mean by that is that, for example, businesses wouldn't have marquees. People just had to know. You just knew you went up to this metal door and knocked on the door and went in, and that's where you could buy this product. That's where they would have, DVDs for sale. There were all these kiosks outside that would sell things like beer or chips or cigarettes or not bootlegs, pirated CDs. You could buy any music you wanted for just a small amount of rubles, because they were basically just copying CDs and selling them. Russia, of course, has this reputation as a place where people like to drink, but they don't sell beer on the street anymore. They don't have these kiosks where you can just go and buy beer. I actually have a story related to that kind of talks about both the cold and this beer culture, because when I was there, you could go and buy a beer pretty much any time. They had lots of different types of beers, and there's a street in Nizhny that's called Bolshaya Pokrovka, which is the pedestrian street that runs down the main way there in the upper part of the city. And in the wintertime, it tells me anything. It was nice to buy beer sometimes and drink it because it was warm. So, it has to be pretty cold outside to enjoy a warm beer.
Right.
So in particular, I remember buying a beer, and they'd sell them in they were all these big half-liter bottles. Because I remember when I came back to the United States, buy usually our beers here are about 0.33 liters. So a half-liter bottle, and I'm drinking it. And it's so cold, it's frothing, like the foam's coming up through the top. And as I'm walking, the foam keeps freezing on the top of the bottle, so I'm having to knock the foam
come out
off the top so I can continue to drink it. Right? Well, the Russia of nowadays is, at least in 2018 when I visited Nizhny, the trains have instructions in English, right? There were coffee shops everywhere. There's coffee to go. There were like pop-up coffee vendors. There were restaurants with enthusiastic and polite waiters and waitresses. Most everything's identified quite clearly by marquees and signs, and it just had taken on a lot more of a Western feel, and much easier. Now, perhaps some of that was due because in 2018 there was something special going on in Russia when I was there. It's called the World Cup. And so they had done a lot of preparation for the World Cup, and then to welcome a lot of international visitors. But it is largely materially become a lot prettier place, a lot flashier, not quite as dreary, dark, and decayed.
Would you say this is mainly the result of the Putin regime?
I mean,
or do you not know?
Causation's always a problem, right? I mean, causation, you'd have to explore lots of different things to say. Putin's, of course, been around for 20 years, so you can say it occurred while he was president. Whether it's due to him or not, I'm actually not willing to say, because I don't know. People do tend to credit. I mean, there is some. I do know among Russians there are people who say, well, I mean, look, there may be some bad things about him, but he's really made this place a lot more comfortable, a lot prettier. And
they tell you that.
Yeah, I've certainly heard people say that. Russians say that about Putin, but I do credit him for stamping out some of the corruption and making it a nicer place. And there's no doubt I mean, I noticed that when my wife and I were visiting Germany recently. It's just that if we want to look at what current Germany looks like, Bavaria, Munich, Russia looks a lot more like that than it did in 2000 when I came. When it was just dreary Soviet cement block and decayed wooden buildings.
What do you consider to be your major accomplishments, having been in the Peace Corps?
Well, I'm very proud of myself for finishing it. Not everybody finished their time.
What do you mean by that?
It was hard. It was lonely. It was difficult. It was unpleasant. Especially the first year. It was really hard.
How many went home?
I don't know. But people did. I mean, I don't know how many people did.
People were leaving fairly often? Or?
Well, I mean, out of 80 people, considering we were spread out over a country that's bigger than, Western Russia is probably about the size. I mean, I don't know if it's got to be close to the size of the United States, and we were spread out all over the place.
Yeah.
So we didn't see each other enough for me to say, well, this one's gone, this one's gone, this one's gone.
And you didn't.
So I don't want to say that. I think a lot of us stuck it out. So I'm not saying that perhaps I'm in the top 10%. No, a lot of people stuck it out, but it was hard, and certainly I'm proud of that for finishing. I'm pleased with. I wanted to learn to speak a second language. I can get by in Russian. I don't sound like
you
a college.
You sound really good.
I don't sound like a college professor, and I couldn't do what I do. Well, I mean, I'm a lawyer.
I think you sound better than a college professor.
But I'm a lawyer, and I could not argue a case in Russian, and I couldn't explain to you how to fix your car in Russian.
Yeah,
I learned something about language in that sense, is that perhaps there's a linguistics component, but there's also just language fits circumstances, right? Because not everyone who speaks English could argue a legal case, because you have to know the jargon. Not everyone can explain how to fix a car, because you may not know how the car works. But language is another component in that, is that I could explain some things about fixing a car in English. I couldn't do it in Russian. So, but I think one of the things about that, though, over the years is that I've learned is that I've rarely, if ever, needed it. It doesn't really offer much of a career adventure. Not here.
No.
And I doubt that it would anywhere else either. Because one of the things in the United States we certainly deal with is the fact that there are so many people who learn English so well because they have to, and because they have so much exposure. Just like we go back to the idea of there are no Russian songs on the radio. Well, there are English songs on everyone's radio who's not an English speaker.
Sure.
And it's a blessing and a curse in the sense that our language is the language of trade and the language of science. And it diminishes other languages in the sense that they aren't as necessary for those things. But then it deprives us of the chance of really needing to learn another language to be able to express ourselves on those topics. So anyway, I've just decided that but as far as having done it in my life, I guess I can say, well, I did. I wanted to do it. I did it. So I'm proud of that. I don't really think that there was anything about my service that was like lasting impact in what I did in Russia. I'm going to just say that. I don't think I did anything in my work there that exists today. It was mainly, I think it mainly benefited me, and it's nice to have those memories. And
do you have any Russian Facebook friends?
Well, Facebook's banned in Russia right now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, I do have. There are people that are friends on Facebook and on Instagram, and then occasionally I see posts, but.
But you don't have a conversation.
No, I don't. I mean,
like I do. I have lots of Filipinos that I correspond with.
I really don't have much contact with anybody there who's on any regular basis.
Yeah, because it would be very difficult to try to.
There would be other avenues. I just think I mean, perhaps it's a personal failing. I don't know. I just haven't maintained those type of relationships.
Have any of your
20 years ago.
Have any of your friends that you had, or students, or whatever, ever come over to visit you?
Yeah, I did. The guy that I talked about that I played in the band with, Koya, he came and visited me. In fact, he had come and visit, and then he decided he was going to go and live in California and open a construction company. So he's doing running a construction company in California. So we actually went out and visited him several years ago. So his family's here. So
you recommend Peace Corps?
Oh yeah, I would. I would even recommend to my son to do it.
Do you show him pictures and talk about it very much? Or does he start rolling his eyes when you do that?
I have talked about it briefly. I think one of the things I certainly hope for this interview is that maybe someday he'll watch it. So he'll know. Because again, I don't think he knows what to ask. And one of the things too, I think in anything about childhood is that growing up as a child, whatever you're exposed to seems as everyday as it can get. So the fact that his dad was in the Peace Corps, that his mom's from Russia, that we speak Russian, is absolutely normal to him. There's nothing special about that. And kids can be drawn to novelty or drawn to
nothing
something
special about that. I think there's something very special.
Well,
about
but
that.
I mean, maybe that's the wrong terminology. I guess what the thing is it's not foreign to him.
Oh,
it is what it is. I mean, you accept. It's somewhat like people who may grow up with both their parents having college degrees. You'd say, well, I mean, doesn't everybody? You kind of know that not everyone has that, but my parents do, and that's kind of normal. And that's my picture in my mind that I use. Or like the idea of seeing structures in Russia that remind you of southeastern Oklahoma because that's where you spent time. It's part of that. The circumstances that surround you. So I think that's my thought on it is that he just doesn't strike him as
how old is
unordinary.
How old?
He's 16.
Oh, okay. He's reached the age of reason, would you say?
I think the thing is he may be considering, I think he'll be open to the idea of, he may be open to the idea of studying internationally, I don't know. But he hasn't had the childhood I did. I mean, we have traveled extensively. I mean, we made particular points. I mean, before COVID, we would take time. Fortunately, my wife's a teacher, and I have my own office, so we spent a month in the Dominican Republic for summer. We spent a month in France. We spent a month living in Russia with him. I mean, he's had opportunities. We took him to the Christmas markets in Bavaria just over Thanksgiving recently. So it's just, he certainly won't have a life like mine where he lands in Frankfurt and says, oh my gosh, Europe's real. Oh my gosh, the United States. He'll just have a different experience.
Yeah.
So whether that leads him in a different path, I think that's just how it is. So Peace Corps would be the same for him.
Do you think that being in Peace Corps is why you become such an international traveler? Or one of the reasons, anyway?
Well, it 100% because my wife wants to travel, and I wouldn't have met my wife if I hadn't have been in. So, unequivocally, yes, I traveled. I mean, I don't know what I would have chosen to do if I weren't married to Zhenya. And at this point, it's like, again, who knows? But that was my
Well,
life.
Peace Corps
in the
was
sense
an
that
adventure, wouldn't
it
you
was.
agree?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And you like adventure.
Yes.
And the Dominican Republic has some aura of adventure to it. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you just don't go to lay out on the beach.
Oh, well, yeah, no. I think. Well, I've done a few things. I think it's just like once you've gone up that climb on the roller coaster and you start going down the roller coaster, you realize it's not quite as scary as you think, and that you're going to get through
Good
it.
way to put it.
Well, it's just that you develop these, and I think definitely as Peace Corps volunteers, that's something all of us can say is true, is that we've done things that were certainly frightening, and certainly were so unusual, and you say, well, if I can do that,
Yeah.
then I can do other things. And I know that maybe it's this thing too, is that brief travel puts you in a position where you're still very much looking at it as an outsider. But if you go and you actually live somewhere and you realize, you know what, I've lived here long enough that it's not just, I'm still an outsider in some ways, but this isn't a momentary observation. I can actually say that it is really different. And I see what's different. And I understand why the way I live at home is just not the same. In the sense that this perspective that you can add where you say, well, it doesn't have to be like this. I know it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
well, I'm interested in what you said about if I can do that, then I can do this. Can you think of one thing, or have you thought of one thing that you think especially applies about doing this? Because you could do that. You did do that.
Well, maybe I don't know if it's exactly related. I mean, in the sense that when I came back from the Peace Corps, I went to law school. And when I went to law school, I had a moment where I thought maybe I'd go get a job and work for someone else when I got out.
Yeah.
Have a job. And when I got closer to graduating and taking the bar, I thought, well, maybe I'll just work for myself. And it's something that
I see.
both my parents, and practically anyone I've ever known, draws a paycheck. Right? You get paid. You have someone you work for, and they ensure that as long as you're working, you're getting paid on a particular day every couple of weeks. And I eventually opened my own law practice, and I've been in this law practice now for 19, 20 years, and I haven't had an employer. And it was something, again, I had no real background on knowing how to think about that. And some people grow up, maybe their dad was self-employed or something.
Yeah.
Mine wasn't. So I think that maybe if there's something in that, is that I certainly didn't have any doubts that it could be done.
You could do it.
Well, I mean, you just do it. And also, too, is that my mom always said something about people. She said she didn't understand why, I think this is going to sound kind of simplistic, but she said she didn't understand why, let's say, if someone lives in the ghetto and they feel kind of stuck there, or anyone who lives in situations, she goes, I don't understand people that feel like stuck in those situations, because I think if you just started walking, eventually you'd walk out of it. And I think that, and over the years I've kind of decided you kind of temper that, because people have relationships. They have people they're close to. It's never just someone by themselves that usually keeps people stuck anywhere, right? But at least the Peace Corps taught me that if I don't it doesn't have to be this way. However I'm living.
Right.
If you just start walking, or if you just go somewhere else, it will be different. And in some ways, I'll be different. There's some similarities, but I'll have to live differently. And if I have to live differently, that sort of affects me too. So, I guess it's maybe that just more cosmopolitan perspective on things, because I certainly didn't start out that way. I mean, I hadn't grown up in a situation where I had that background.
I am very happy that you made that distinction, because I think that is one of the true values of Peace Corps. Is to give you that kind of introspection, that kind of confidence, that maybe you didn't have kind of experience that you gained while you were there that you could put to good use? And you have.
Well, it was very meaningful to me at the time. It's been a long time since I've had that experience.
Yeah.
So it's become less proximate in its relevancy to the things here. I mean, it's sort of what the relevancy, the effect it had was years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's those things that happened years ago can push you in certain
They certainly can.
So I value it. It's certainly not something I talk about very often anymore. People won't ask me much about it, so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it after so many years.
Sure.
Especially while I still remember some things.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about is you when you got out of Peace Corps, you came back and got in law school. When did you decide you were going to go to law school?
I had some thoughts about law school when I was in my senior year in college. So I thought about, I'd been responsible for revising the bylaws for the English club at OSU. I found that really interesting to kind of put things, obligations in order.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the law is resolving conflicts between various obligations or trying to order obligations. And so I'd had thoughts about it, and I actually took the LSAT before I left.
Oh, okay.
To be an option. But then I cemented it during my second year. I started applying to law school because I decided I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to Oklahoma, most likely, and I'll go to law school here. So that's what I did. Came back. And started.
And you liked law school?
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating, really. It was fascinating. I was well prepared for it since I knew how to read. We did a lot of reading. And,
mm-hmm.
I don't know, I mean, it was, the subject matter and the theory were very fascinating to me. I mean, the same way that it was fascinating when I was working on, I certainly decided that I might pursue that. The other thing is that it was very pleasant telling people I was in law school compared to when I was telling people I was studying English, because nobody ever asked me, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
So it was a new experience where I didn't have to justify why I was doing what I was doing. Although people should ask. It really is not as self-evident as people would think.
Oh, wow.
What are you going to do with that
Mm-hmm.
degree? And then how are you going to turn it into a productive occupation? Because it is,
I'll be the new Perry Mason.
well, the thing about, maybe one of the things about, I think you could have an entire conversation with people if there's ever a project other than Peace Corps. If you went around and asked lawyers why they became lawyers and what do they think about it, what do they think about it after doing it for years,
Yeah.
you'll get just as in-depth and interesting stories.
Oh, sure.
So I won't go that route because I could talk another 2 hours more about just
Yeah.
the journey of being a lawyer. It's had its own. There's a lot of good stories there too.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy that you took this time and that you shared your stories with me. I think people are going to really enjoy this. Is there anything else that you had thought about saying or that you wanted to say that you haven't, that you can think of right now?
That's a question that some people think you should ask at the end of every of a witness after their testimony, right?
Well, I think it's a very good question because while I'm interviewing you, you're talking and your brain is working and you're thinking about certain things, but at the time, it's not quite right that it comes out. And then you forget about it. So I'm thinking...
I've tried to be very intentional about it. What I really hope for the interview is that I have been descriptive enough for people who listen to it to be able to draw their own conclusions about what happened and what I think and what I was seeing. I find it less valuable to people when all you do is communicate impressions.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just hope that the interview is anyone who's made it this far, that I've accomplished that. If I haven't, then I apologize.
Okay. We're not going to end on an apology.